guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new, hi, I'm May, and I make digital fluid pours with cells, otherwise known as digital fluid art or digital pour art. And today on Procreate, I wanted to show you a few brushes that already exist in Procreate that you could kind of use and change into Blender brushes to add some cells and textures to your digital pour without purchasing any brushes or anything like that. So today we're going to be working in Procreate. I usually start with a canvas of 5,000 by 3,500 with 1,000 DPI. Shrink that down like so. Now, what I did was I've already been working with my own, in a previous video as you saw, my own stamped brushes. That you can go check out my other tutorial to see all of those. Blender brushes that I'm still working on that I haven't yet made a video with. But I also made a folder here, brushes you can make. And we'll go through this now. So what you're going to want to do is create a new folder, and you can call it whatever you like. You could call it, so you kind of remember its name, I don't know, Procreate Cell Brushes. Why not? Like so. And then we're going to go through and add the brushes into them and then go through the settings. So the ones that I like to use are under spray paints. I would go with flicks, drag it to the left and hit duplicate. And then you're going to want to drag that up into the folder that we just made. So by just long pressing and then going up and dropping it into that folder like so. And then another one we're going to do is, if I can remember, I have to kind of look on here. We're going to go with water, which should be under elements. Water, and you're going to duplicate that brush, hold it, if it would work, and drag it into that folder that we just created like so. And then we're going to go down into materials. And I start with old skin, is one I was playing with. Like so, duplicate, and then drag it up if it's going to work. There you go. And drop that in there. Sorry, that was my water bottle. Make sure to stay hydrated. So far we have flicks, water, and old skin, and then we're going to go back down into materials again. Now I was playing with, I want to say Furno. Duplicate and drag that as well into your folder that you just created. And you should have 4 brushes: flicks, water, old skin, and Furno, like so. And make sure those are the same ones I have. Flicks, yep, and those 4 there. And we'll turn them into Blender brushes shortly. So I'm going to be working from this folder, but your folder should look like this. And now we're going to go into the settings, so that way you can play with the settings as well and make them match mine. So let's start with flicks. I don't think I changed at all. I think I left the settings pretty much the same. Spacing is 65%, stabilization none, taper none, shape 91%, all that's the same. Grain, like so, rendering, and yeah, wet mix. So that one you don't have to change too much. But water, we shrunk it down quite a bit, as you can see from the preview here versus the original preview, just to kind of give it more of a contrast and opaque look, and smaller to create kind of that cell-like pattern. So I'll go into this one for you. And we'll go through each one, so that way you can pause the screen and edit them, so that way so they all look the same and can work along together. So stroke path, everything is none. Stabilization, everything is none. I didn't touch the taper. Your shape, again, I don't think I played with that too much. The grain is where I mainly played with it quite a bit, and I changed it. I think it was originally moving and we changed it to texturized, scale 11%, depth maximize, blend, multiply, and contrast at 15%. So when you play with it on here, it should kind of give that kind of look like so. Rendering, we have uniform blending, flow is at max, burnt edges is 11%, wet edges is none, and we have a pull of 51% under wet mix, and everything else is none. So once you have that, and we play around with it, you should kind of give an interesting pattern. It's pretty tiny, but when you zoom in, you can see it gives that little nice little compact pattern. But you can also, if you find, the nice thing with these brushes, because you can play with them very easily, if you find the scale is a bit too small, you can always just put up to 20%, like so, depending on whatever canvas size you're working with. Make it a little bigger. I think that's not too bad. I'll leave it at 20%. And then what we're going to do is we'll turn them all into blender brushes, and then we'll kind of play with them a bit. So what you're going to want to do with your water once you've changed all your settings is you're going to want to duplicate it and leave it at the exact same, but all you're going to do to the settings to make it a blender brush is go under wet mix, and under dilution and pull you want to put them both at max. And then I often would go to about the brush and change this the beginning of the to say BB for blender brush, so you don't get confused with your other water brush, just so it's a bit separated. And that's how I make a blender brush. And then for now, I don't think I changed at all either. I think I left that one pretty much the same as what it was, but just to make sure, go through and so you can see all the settings and have them all the same, like so. Rendering and wet mix. Usually don't go past wet mix. I don't really change the brushes too much there. And then again, you're going to want to duplicate it, and then under this one, again without changing any of the settings, you go to about this brush, change the beginning to BB if you want to separate it, or you can put blender brush as well and go into your wet mix and put dilution and pull up to maximum. And then we'll move on to the next one, which I think I did was old skin. Kind of funny, but the old skin kind of, the grain of it kind of almost like a cell-like pattern to it. So it's just, that's another thing too, if you don't like these brushes and you go through all the Procreate brushes and seeing if they have any patterns that are similar to cell textures or bubbles, you can kind of do this with any Procreate brush. These are kind of the 4 that I picked, so you can kind of get an idea with it and how to play with the brushes and all that fun stuff. So with old skin, we did a spacing of 29%. Didn't touch the stabilization or the taper shape. You didn't change anything as well. Grain, whether it was changed or not, I think it was just texturized. And then a scale of 31%, depth the maximum, blend mode multiply, brightness 0, and a contrast of 25%. Rendering intense blending, and with a pull of 35%. And then again, you're going to duplicate that brush, and then not changing much settings other than wet mix. Make sure your dilution and your pull is at max, and then if you'd like, you can put BB or blender brush at the beginning, just to keep them a bit more simple or separated. And then we'll do the same thing with flick. So you're going to hit duplicate, change the name if you like, and then under wet mix, maximum dilution and maximum pull. And these are the 4 that I'll be playing with. So before we get into that, we'll create a digital fluid pour. Actually, still, I was playing with this one with the stamp cells, and I do like this color palette quite a bit, so I'll leave this color palette here. If you want to screenshot the screen and copy these colors and follow along exactly, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll move forward, and we're going to go with a brush of painting. and Tamar. Let's play with this one. And start with green. And so I like to see, I don't know, as much as you can see it, kind of zoom in there to see what the brush size is. I do like to kind of tap the screen to see what the actual size will be like that. So if you don't have it already in your settings or haven't done already, you would want to see the size of your brush cursor. All you do is go into the settings, which is kind of the tool-like icon, go into preferences, and make sure your brush cursor is turned on. It'll make it a little easier. You don't have to, but I prefer it that way myself. And fun part, now we just kind of start laying paint. I like to kind of do the darker color and push my brush in different strokes and lighter and harder to get the different color patterns. Just kind of go willy-nilly. And so this is kind of just to play around with those brushes I just showed you. Like so. A bit more of that neutral color. A bit more yellow. And then we're going to go into liquify. Shrink your canvas down so you can see all the edges. Push. Usually start around 60 to 70%. Same with the distortion, about 70 to 75. Make sure your pressure and momentum are max. And have fun. As I said, I really like this color palette. It creates some interesting colors when you pull that paint. I find once I've pulled it around a little bit, after the first few initial pushes, I like to drop the distortion around or down a bit so it doesn't keep pulling that paint in that kind of weird wiggle pattern. But a trick, if you find you've lost or you prefer that wiggle pattern and you've moved it around and you found you've lost it, you can easily get it back. And there's a few ways you can do it. You can just put the distortion back up and just kind of put your finger or your brush down, just wiggle a little bit, and it will kind of distort the paint like so in a random pattern. If you want a bit more control, you can go with either your left or right twirl. And I like to drop the pressure and the momentum about half, and I like to keep the distortion up high because that creates more little spirals like so. Like you can see how tightly knit those spirals are. And you can actually back out, or not back, but backspace by just double tapping the screen. But keep in mind it will erase the entire section you did, not each individual step. So let's say you pushed your image and then you did a bunch of twirls around the screen and you don't like one particular twirl. Unfortunately, you can't just go back one. If you tap the screen, it will go back to the original last step of the push. So keep that in mind. But like I was showing, so distortion on twirl gets a ton of individual little spirals. And if we were to lower the distortion, we'll just do one large spiral. And if you go up higher, it'll just do a few like so. But if you want to get that wiggle pattern back, actually I did go back a bit. You want to keep it on maximum and very gently just wiggle, go back and forth gently. If you don't push too hard on the brush and go back and forth, you can kind of get that ripple pattern back if you've lost it pushing around the paint, which is pretty cool. Like so. And then if you want to do kind of those blown out edges look, with liquify you can do crystals, which is pretty cool. And kind of hold it down like so. It'll kind of give it not quite the same look, but I'm not sure. I haven't played with this one much, but I think you want the distortion up high for it to. But I find what you can do is if you blow out those edges a little bit, it gives you something to work with the push option, like so. It's almost like taking a tiny little straw and pulling out those edges. But what you can do then with the push option is then go back through, and where you made those little blown out edges, just kind of push them back and forth and make them a bit larger, which will kind of give you that similar kind of blown out effect, which is kind of neat. Like so. So once you have created your digital pour how you like it, we're going to go back into our brushes that we created. And I find I like to zoom right in so you can pick different spots. I said I love this paintbrush and how it looks when you move it around. It creates some interesting texture. And actually what I'll do, oops, sorry, hit my water. I'll turn my screen brightness down a little bit. I think that might help. So I should do that at the beginning. That's a little easier. So now, let's go with the brushes that we made. And we can start with, what I like to use the flicks for is kind of like that blowtorch kind of look you get on real acrylic pours. And I find water kind of gives that lace pattern, and same with old skin, whereas that Fresno almost kind of gives that bubble look. And when working with the more stamped cell ones, not the blender brushes, I kind of like to do it on a second layer so that way you can kind of play with it before kind of merging it down. And keep in mind though, with the blender brushes though, you need to use them on the actual layer because you did full dilution and full pull. As you'll see, even if you did black on a blender brush, it kind of does nothing because the idea of it is to pull the color around on the canvas on that pattern. So as long as you're on the original layer and you pull it up, I actually can't quite see it too well right now, but you can kind of start to see it pull those colors. But we'll do, like for now, for example, you can really start to see it pull like so. So let's play with, I'm going to do, again on the second layer, if you want to do more of the stamp, I find the stamped ones, not the blender brushes, you kind of get a little bit more control. So let's say we go this area, you don't necessarily like how much it bled into that kind of brownish color. You can take a color near there and water, kind of drag it very lightly. Like you want to do it lightly because I found with the water, if you push really hard, it kind of just goes white. But the lighter you do it, it will kind of keep that same color. And if you find your scale is a little too large, you just go back in there and drop your scale down a little bit and start pulling where you had that color and pull the water around. And it gives it kind of a cell-like pattern, which is pretty cool. And then you can go into liquify and play with it even further. And you can use expand and blow out some of the edges to make little bubbles more pronounced, or you can use the twirl and make it a little more liquid, like so, which is pretty cool. And then you can go, oh, I did that on the actual layer, that's fine. But now you can use the blender brush that we made. And let's say you want to keep the same pattern going, but you want to do it with the blue. Then you just drag it down. And you can kind of, now this one's a bit of a smaller scale. So even if you want to match it, you want to match the same scale. So this scale we did, we'll go back into this brush, so we did 14. So then you want to go back into your blender brush and make sure your scales are the same, so that way it doesn't look too different. I think I did 15, but close enough. Then you can see they start to blend together a bit more, like so. And the difference between the stamped one that we did over here is you can pick whatever color you want in the area and have a little bit more control, and you can either do it on the layer itself or the layer above and kind of play with and manipulate it that way. Whereas with the blender brush, it pulls the color wherever your brush is coming from, and it has to be on the layer with the paint or it won't show up. Like if I was to do it here, nothing's gonna happen. Yeah, and as you can see, it kind of gives that interesting little lace pattern. And then you can even go dark too if you want to do a contrasting color. You do deep red and go back to the stamp one. More of a deep red pattern, like so. You can blend them. And then for no, I like this one because it kind of has, like I said, almost like that bubble like appearance. So for example, this one's the red. It kind of gives that lacy bubble feel, which is kind of cool. And like I said, if you don't push too hard, you can kind of do little stamps of it, and the lighter, harder you push, you can have it bleed through, like so, with the stamp, and kind of choose colors. Or again, we can work with the blender brush that we made of the Fresno on the first layer, and drag in the colors like so, like the yellow, or the reddy and the green. Kind of just have fun with it. It's kind of cool. Like I said, this is if you don't necessarily want to purchase any brushes, or you're still getting used to playing with your digital fluid pours. You want to kind of get an idea of how cells and bubbles work. This is kind of a great way to do it because you can do it with the brushes that are already on Procreate. They're free. You can manipulate them, duplicate them, and kind of get more practice versus kind of diving into brushes that you might not necessarily know how to use, which is pretty cool. And oops, bring in some of that green and a bit of that white, like so. Just kind of go everywhere, really. The nice thing with this is, because it's digital, you can mix whatever kind of cell patterns you like. So for example, if you prefer choosing your own color and having it more vibrant, like so, you can take the Fresno and you can add it to this one. Am I on the blender? Yes, oops. On the stamp ones, you can bring in colors into the ones you just did. And let's say though you want to kind of bleed it into a kind of lacy cell pattern, then you can kind of, oops, without pressing too hard so it doesn't go super white, kind of layer them over top of each other, like so, which is kind of pretty. And then with the Flicks one, I love this one because it kind of, like I said, gives those blowtorched bubbles. So using the non-blender brush, you can do white, or you can stick with the lighter color that's on your palette and kind of up that up a little bit. Very gently. You can play with the opacity. If you get something you like, you can kind of put those around the edges, even over top of them, to kind of give that kind of blowtorched feel, which is kind of cool. Or you can go into the main layer and use the blender brush and use it on areas to drag it as well, which is kind of nice. The same thing, you can play with the opacity. It gives you like these little, tiny little bubbles. And then the other brush we created was Old Skin. Now this one I was playing with a little bit, and the pattern is very, very, very tiny. So depending on your canvas size too, that's the nice thing with these ones, is you can kind of get used to the scales depending on what canvas you're doing. But this one we might have to up the scale quite a bit and just kind of see how it works. It's a little too big. Let's drop down to 50, and I think, oops, that depth back up to max. Bring up that contrast a little bit to 40%. Make sure we actually stay on the right brush. use a darker color. Let's stick with black so we can actually, that's the nice thing when you're doing on a second layer, like so. So I think you can kind of play with it, and so if you don't like how the scale is, you can go back in and play with it. This one I find almost gives, not necessarily like an old skin look, but almost kind of like mermaid scales, which is kind of pretty. What I like about this one is after you put it down, you could go with the water brush and kind of flare it out a bit and overlap them. And then you can take your flicks brush and then kind of go in a bit and create a pattern. And then like I was saying before, if you go into liquify, this one I would play with liquify quite a bit. You can go and expand, drop it down quite a bit. And you can pick the individual kind of lacy patterns, kind of start blowing some of them out, which is kind of nice to create more, so it's not so uniform looking, which is kind of neat. I'm making all those little bubbles. And then if you prefer the uniform look but you don't like that, it's all kind of not liquid looking, you can go into your push, your distortion, kind of just wiggle it around a little bit, like so, just to kind of get that distortion, or you can do your twirl. And again, I drop them down a bit and wiggle it around to kind of give it more of that wet feel. And same with the water. And nice thing with the stamped ones that you created, if you do it on a second layer, you can manipulate it and liquify, and it won't affect the ones that you did on the paint layer. Whereas with these ones, if you went in and played with them on liquify, you'll be moving the paint underneath, which also could work too, and kind of make it more uniform looking. And you can put your distortion up high when playing with expand and give your bubbles kind of a more warped look. Now make sure you're on the right layer, like I was. And also do it on a part that's on the second layer. There we go. The higher the distortion, the more wonky your bubbles will look. And then you can take these ones and you can also blow them out, which is kind of cool. Or you can go over to the for no ones you did. You can remember which ones were the not on a second layer, and you can blow those out even more. So uniform. And even the ones you did on a second layer, if you like your placement, all you'd have to do is just merge your layer down. If you want to play with it with the paint and kind of have it move together a little more uniform, then you can go and play with everything, which is pretty cool. Like so. And yeah, so these are 4 brushes that I played with that I thought turned out pretty well and kind of work similar to the ones that I have already made myself, and similar to kind of acrylic pours and getting the idea and the feel of it. And yeah, and there's the 4, but 8 in total if you turn them into blender brushes, and that's kind of how it turns out, which is pretty cool. And like I said, again, it gives you an idea how to play with the brushes and see how they work and kind of get a feel for it before kind of purchasing anything that you're not quite used to using, or you don't necessarily want to purchase anything but want to get the idea and play with stuff. And like I said, these are the 4 that I just kind of picked and played with that I used in the past that worked really well for me, especially the water brush, before I started creating any of my own brushes. So like I said, give these a try or make them and see how they turn out. And if you would rather try some of my other cell techniques in that you use liquify for, I have a bunch of other tutorials up. Go check those out, and if you try it, definitely tag me in your guys' art. I love seeing everybody's creations. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope everyone has a good day. Bye!